Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Dwayne Marsh, Vice President of Institutional and Sectoral Change at Race Forward and the Center for Social Inclusion. Dwayne also serves as Deputy Director of Government Alliance on Race and Equity, a core program of the new Race Forward. Welcome to Dialogue for Health, Dwayne. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I want to join the law and welcome everybody to the conversation today. You can see the distribution of registrants for today's session. We're really excited to have national participation in this conversation. And you can also see the distribution of participation that we see by sector. So in addition to government, we have a lot of representation from nonprofits and the university sector as well. Just a moment about who we are and being our moderator. Race Forward is a national organization that, together with the Center for Social Inclusion, brings close to 50 years of experience in seeking out and dismantling structural racism across the United States in a range of settings, particularly focusing on communities of color who have been marginalized historically through public and other processes. We recognized that we had to come together as an organization because the moment called for deeper, more systemic work by organizations that could step forward and support communities in their efforts to do so. Our theory of change really recognizes there are multiple functions that are critical. We have to shift the narrative on the conversation on race because that conversation is struggling in the United States today. We know to do that, we have to have research that can tell those stories, can bring the perspectives of communities of color that have been marginalized from conversations in the mainstream around outcomes we want to see in our communities. We have to build movement and capacity for people to be able to make the change they want to see on the ground. We also recognize that to do that, we have to change policies and have better outcomes than we've seen historically in service of our communities. But if we don't change our systems and structures, have institutional and sectoral change, we will not, in fact, make permanent and lasting differences for the people we try to serve. The Government Alliance on Race and Equity is a national network that really lives the ethic of trying to do that institutional change, recognizing jurisdictions across the country who are trying to lift up a generation of practices and institutional transformation that can, in fact, lead to better outcomes for our communities. Growing rapidly, doubling in size each of the last 4 years, and having an increasing number of state agencies as well. There are also multiple jurisdictions who are members who participate, helping to put practice into action. And these are jurisdictions that are really concentrating on not just the rhetoric of racial equity, but making a difference. Just to give you a sense of the rapid growth of that network, you can see in January of last year, there was a diversity of interest in this around the country. But as you look at the July of this year, you can see the rapid growth we've seen in that network. And, you know, we're fond of saying we're thrilled that New York City is a member, a very large and important contribution to this network. But we're equally thrilled that Fort Collins, Colorado, a small college town outside of Denver, is a member as well, because we recognize these issues cut across geography, they cut across demography, they cut across political ideology. Solving the question of race in our communities is something that has to be done across the United States. In California itself, really leading the way through, you can see close to 24.5 million residents living in jurisdictions that are participating in the Government Alliance. Rapid growth, and much of that has come through a learning cohort process, which you'll hear more about today. Overall, there's an effective practice that we've seen jurisdictions apply to make this happen, and it really boils down to normalizing, operationalizing, and organizing for change. Normalizing being building a shared analysis and shared definitions, holding the urgency and priority of the work to advance racial equity, not being caught in the long history that's brought us to this moment. Operationalizing, taking that priority and finding the tools and data that can help us to identify solutions and strategies, measure their progress, make adjustments as necessary, and then organizing, and not just the traditional community organizing against the institution because it feels the institution has failed it, but really organizing internally and building partnerships, working across sectors, because while we can't do it without government, government can't do it alone. And then also working in new ways with community, not just to input or get engagement, but have leadership, ownership of processes, to co-design the future we want to see, visualizing those kinds of communities we want to create. We've had an experience in building these learning cohorts, which has led to the conversation today, which I think is one of the most exciting outputs we've seen from that work. And these are year-long, often processes with groups of jurisdictions or representatives using a curriculum that builds the field of practice, providing technical assistance to participants, having peer-to-peer strategizing and problem solving, and then having public speaker series where leaders come in from around the country to share best practice. These teams usually comprise 8 to 10 folks from each jurisdiction that participates, and what the jurisdictions receive are curriculum they can apply in their own change efforts, trained facilitators to implement training with other employees, use of racial equity analyses tools that can help them in policy practices and budget decisions, and then sample policies and practices that can help them move ultimately towards having a racial equity action plan that really helps to move the jurisdiction or the department forward. We've learned a lot in this time. You'll hear much about this during the call today. Just the importance of collective learning, how you build customized technical assistance, how you use a curriculum that's built in a field of practice, dealing with peer-to-peer strategizing, and then also just bringing consistency, integrity, and delivery to the work that is done within these governments. So with no further ado, I want to open up our panel and our first presenter, who is Julia Kaplan. She is the Program Director for the California Health and All Policies Task Force at the Public Health Institute and has been a valuable partner in building this enterprise, and she'll get us started talking about how the work got started in the Capital Cohort.
Thanks so much, Dwayne. I'm really pleased to be part of this presentation and also even more so to be part of the work with the Capital Cohort and with the GARE organization. I'm just getting over to where I can advance my slides. There we go. So I want to start by just giving a little bit of background on California, kind of at a glance. I know that almost half of you on the phone, or a very large number of you, are in California. Many of you are from other parts of the country. Our population is almost 40 million people. It's a very large state. We have the world's 6th largest economy. We have very diverse demographics in terms of race, ethnicity. We have many immigrants, both documented and undocumented. We have significant wealth and health inequities, and we also have a governor right now who is a global leader on climate change. And all of these things are important in thinking both about our health and all policies work and about our work doing racial equity. And I want to start by talking a little bit about our health and all policies work. We've been doing health and all policies since 2010, and this work has really been the platform or the foundation that has served to kind of undergird and support all of our racial equity work and the work that we're doing now in partnership with GARE. So for the last 8 years, we've been building relationships, and you can see up here the logos of a number of the departments and agencies we work with. We've been building multi-agency relationships around health, equity, and environmental sustainability, working on issues like access to parks, healthy food, community greening, violence prevention, active transportation, and so on. And we staff this through a multi-organizational team with our staff at the Public Health Institute. We're housed at the Strategic Growth Council, which is a branch of the state's governor's office, and we also have staff on our team at the Department of Public Health. The Health and All Policies Task Force has served as a multi-agency venue to build equity capacity, and this has looked like a lot of different things, and there's a lot I could say about this, but to keep this part brief, one of the areas where we've had the most traction is helping state departments that administer grants bring an equity perspective into their grant administration. So this is helping them think about their strategies for community engagement, for public transparency, and also for ensuring that the dollars that they spend in local communities reach the communities that need them the most and not just the communities that put together the strongest proposals or that might have the resources to hire professional grant writers. Over the course of the last 8 years, equity has become a more and more central part of this work. The image on the right is one that we've used quite a lot to communicate about equity and educate and kind of have these conversations about what equity really means. And on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see where it says that there's a message that racism harms health. This is something that we began talking about a few years ago and has been a really important part of the conversation around what health equity is, the way that racism is a health equity issue and is actually really a central part of what we need to be working on in our health and all policies work. And Meredith Lee, who will present later, is going to share a great slide that we have created here in California and have used about the relationship between racism and health. So here's a brief timeline to show the trajectory from our health and all policies work into our racial equity work. And at the top, as I've said, we've been doing the health and all policies work, but then in 2016, 2 of the health and all policies departments joined the GARE organization, and Dwayne and his team were running a GARE cohort for local governments in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the Departments of Public Health and the Department of Housing and Community Development both enrolled, traveled down to the Bay Area for all of the trainings and went through the year-long cohort, and they reported back on their experiences. And we found that we were very interested in seeing how we could learn from that and bring that work to state government here in Sacramento. So we proposed that maybe we could actually launch a capital cohort here for state government and really customize it to the unique issues that are happening within state government and do it across the single enterprise but very large jurisdiction of the state of California. We were very pleased that Dwayne and his team said yes. And in 2017, we put a lot of effort into building political will and recruiting participants. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides. We then launched the capital cohort, and Kelsey will talk about that and what that really looks like. And now we're looking to the future and what's next, and we're really pleased that our participants want to continue this work. So here are some of the strategies that we've used to build political will for this work. And I want to start by talking about how important political will is for this. When we first had this idea, we had many people tell us that it was a great idea, but that we would never be able to pull it off. They said, this is the wrong time to do it. We're near the end of our gubernatorial term. This is not a time when departments want to take on new things. Departments will be risk averse. They're not going to want to look this directly at their racial equity issues because of the public scrutiny. We asked departments to commit money towards paying for the trainings, and we were told nobody will come up with the money. So there were a lot of kind of people who said we'd like to see it happen, but we don't think it will come through. So we set what we thought was a realistic goal, and we said, well, what if we try to recruit 4 or 5 departments? So we're not going to get the whole state, but let's start with a few, and we'll pilot it, and we'll see how it goes. As it turns out, we did a really good job of recruitment and of building support, and we've ended up with 18 departments participating on 12 different. This comes up as, this is really the key question that we get from other folks when we talk about the capital cohort work that we're doing and the racial equity work is, how do you get so many departments and agencies to take on this work? And so I've already been talking about the relationship building, which has been absolutely fundamental to this. And as I said, we'd hoped for only 4 or 5 departments, but the response was far greater than that. So I'm going to walk through a few of the things that we have done to build political will. One of those is we conducted an equity survey long before we decided to do the GARE work, but a couple of years ago, where we asked departments what they were doing around equity, how do they define equity, what does equity mean to them, do they have statutory mandates around equity, and what are they? What are their barriers to doing equity work? What are the gaps? Where do they feel like they need capacity building? And that yielded very important information with us. And we were able to share that out publicly to say departments care about equity issues and they're doing a lot and there are significant gaps and shortcomings and they want help. We also formed, as we launched the GARE work, we formed a racial equity strategy team, and this is really a leadership team So there are high-level leaders in state government who are not going to be able to spend the time coming to all of the GARE trainings, but we want them involved, and we want them involved helping to think about strategy, troubleshooting when difficult things come up, thinking about systems-wide problem solving. For example, every department that we're working with cares about workforce issues and from an equity lens, and so we're working with, on our strategy team, folks from the State Department of Human Resources to think about how to take a systems-wide approach to some of those issues that individual departments face but are not individual department issues. We've also done a lot around public accountability. We've found that the more public we are about this work, that stakeholders are interested, all of the local GARE initiatives are interested in this work. They want to see this happening in state government. And so we have created a website around our GARE work, and we also have, through Health and All Policies, an action plan around equity in government practices that includes commitments to the GARE work. When we held a recruitment session for GARE, and one of our colleagues had the brilliant idea of holding that recruitment session in the governor's chambers. And the fact that it was there lent legitimacy to this effort. And then we were able to ask the director of the state health department and 2 other executive leaders who work closely with our state cabinet to come and present at that information session. That helped normalize the conversation. Dwayne talked about normalize, operationalize, and organize, and this is one of our normalized pieces, and helped create an enabling culture that said this work is okay, it's good to do, the state government leadership is behind you. And I think that had a lot to do with the high level of response that we had. We also do a lot of executive engagement for all of the teams, so we're meeting with executives in those departments on a regular basis and making sure that they're actively engaged in the work. I mentioned communications tools already. In addition to the website, we have a video, we've created a fact sheet, PowerPoints, so a lot to kind of have an external communication. This webinar, in fact, is a part of that. And then the last bullet here is something that Meredith, who will present later, took a lot of leadership on, which was conducting an analysis of our state workforce salaries and looking at race and gender pay inequities. And although this was not taken on by well, actually some of the individual departments then subsequently took this on themselves, but this initiative we took on across all of state government to help highlight in additional ways the need for racial equity and also be able to identify some of the pathways forward around that. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Kelsey, who is talking about, well, I guess I'm turning things back to Dwayne or over to Kelsey, talking about the capital cohort. Thanks so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. So happy to introduce Kelsey Lyles. She's the Program Coordinator and Equity Specialist at the Public Health Institute. She's also a staff team member at the Health and All Policies program, and she manages the implementation of the High Equity in Government Practices Action Plan, and she's the staff lead for the work of the capital cohort. She'll take us deeper into the mechanics of the program.
Thank you, Dwayne and Julia and everyone who joined today. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you all. And as Julia was mentioning, that recruitment event in October was a really important piece of getting a sense of the interest to do this work. And one piece to highlight was that outreach and advanced planning really helped to support that event. Our team created a flyer that we disseminated to many individuals that we thought would be interested, as well as different listservs and work groups in government. And we found that the word really spread pretty quickly by word of mouth. We also asked that attendees fill out an interest sheet to learn more information after that event. So about 80 people attended, and then representation from 20 different departments filled out those cards for us to then conduct follow-up with. And that's really when the technical assistance began. We helped these 12 teams that you see represented on the slides fill out contracts to participate, think about their team formation, And we also offered to do a leadership briefing with each team so that they could get approval from their highest level of leadership, whether it was their director or secretary. We were so pleased to be able to work with these 12 different teams from sectors like housing and the arts and transportation. It's made it a very rich experience. Another strategy that worked well was being very upfront about expectations of this program early on and being transparent about the requirements. Our team developed a tip sheet with guidance for creating a diverse team, thinking about diversity very broadly, including identity as well as experience. So to do this work, it's great to have different minds in the room, from legal services, communications, human resources, program staff, really all of the different government functions that represent opportunities for us to transform our policies. Teams and departments made a financial commitment to participate. It was $15,000, and that to us was really important because we want government to invest in racial equity. And we were also very transparent about the time commitment that this work takes. Teams did have to commit to 50 hours of training and learning, as well as time in between those learning sessions to really complete homework assignments and do the work as a group. And I think the department saw the return on investment by investing in this. I'd also like to point out that the structure of the team was that each team had a team lead who really took on additional responsibility of coordinating internally and facilitating meetings, as well as an executive sponsor that was a liaison between the team and also their director or secretary to make sure that there was communications and updates and really maintaining that political will and support. The next slide really is just a photo of our kickoff event. It was really exciting. We had about 150 people from those 19 different departments and agencies, and there was a lot of excitement in the room. Our pre-survey showed that over 70% of folks who participated actually volunteered, so they're definitely champions for this work. And something that we'd like to do more of in the future is find opportunities for the departments to work more across sectors and get to know each other. I'd like to share a little bit about the key elements of the learning year. There are 7 full group learning sessions that GARE comes and facilitates with their expertise on topics such as government's role in promoting racial equity, how do we measure our outcomes and really be outcomes focused in this work. Recently, we had a workforce equity and community engagement session where we were able to partner with State Department colleagues from the Office of Health Equity and also the Department of Human Resources to co-facilitate. And that was very well received because we want to bring in expertise from within government as well as outside of government. In between those learning sessions, the teams have many group assignments to do. They research the history of historical racism and the relationship to their department. They do an organizational assessment about how they sit on a continuum of different functions such as budgeting and contracting, for example, or stakeholder engagement. They create a racial equity visionary statement for their department, and they also practice using the racial equity tool. The main outcome of this first learning year is a racial equity action plan that's tailored to their department's needs, and our team is also available to provide consultation on the development of that plan as well. We found that, and something else to point out is that we facilitate team lead meetings once a month as a safe space where people can really share how things are going in their team and get some guidance and technical assistance and do problem solving together, and that has helped build some trust amongst the group. Simultaneously and in complement to those 7 learning sessions, our team has been holding, we call them Advancing Equity Speaker Series, on different topics that are open to anyone in state government, and this is a way to really bring other colleagues into the fold. We're gearing up for one this week, actually on trauma-informed workplace strategies, and it's been a way to incorporate additional social justice topics and really build our expertise. And we house these recordings on our Strategic Growth Council website, so we invite you to check those out. And right now is a really interesting part of the learning year because teams are starting to develop their action plans. And some of the early identified topics that are kind of rising to the top include focusing internally on our workforce equity strategies, such as recruitment and hiring, and making sure that we represent all of California and all of the populations that we serve. Additional topics include language access, environmental justice, and thinking about other staff capacity building opportunities, whether it's implicit bias, for example, or just other topics that we would benefit from learning more about. And we're also thinking ahead. We've heard from many people that they'd like to maintain their momentum, although we are going through a transition period soon and we'll have a new administration. We really want to make sure that our racial equity work does not get lost. So we are thinking about an implementation year for this learning cohort that's gone through the first year, where they would be able to finalize their action plans, think about ways to really institutionalize the work through formal structures. Many of the teams are starting to do that by creating subcommittees and work groups. We're going to hear from Meredith next, who will describe the Public Health Department's implementation plan, and we're really excited about what's next. And lastly, I'd just like to share that we'd love to keep in touch with you all. If we have a Health in All Policies program website, as well as a Capital Cohort program web page that has a video about this work and ways to keep in touch and join our listserv. And thank you. I will turn things over to Dwayne to introduce Meredith.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, for that. And it's a pleasure to introduce Meredith Lee, who's a health program specialist in the Office of Health Equity at the California Department of Public Health. She also serves on the Health in All Policies team. She coordinates collaborative multi-agency efforts to increase active transportation, promote healthy land use and planning, and incorporate health and health equity into state policy guidance. Also was one of the driving forces of that local participation that the Department of Public Health had back in 2016, and a bridge in some ways to this state cohort that is now robust and active. So a pleasure to have Meredith share some of her experiences as well.
Thank you so much, Dwayne, and thank you, Kelsey and Julia, for providing all that great background information. Again, my name is Meredith Lee, and I wear two hats with our team. So as Dwayne mentioned, I both sit on our Health in All Policies staff force team with Julia and Kelsey, and also within the Department of Public Health, or CDPH. I work on our internal Health in All Policies work, as well as our racial and health equity initiatives, and I'm the lead staff person there in terms of the implementation work. I lead our work group. I'm the team lead for the work group. As Kelsey mentioned in the structure, each team has a team lead. And I also support and staff our executive steering committee. And I just want to acknowledge, before going any further, both my colleagues, Tahir Nasser and Solange Gould. The three of us are our internal department's kind of team that's leading this work, and I couldn't do this work without them. All right. I'm going to provide just quickly, I know we're running short on time, so I'll go through some of these slides rather quickly. As Julia and others mentioned, the Department of Public Health, we're actually in our third year of our racial and health equity work. And the Department of Public Health has had a long commitment to health equity, and it's only been in the last few years that we've taken that explicit focus on racial equity. So our this is our second year of participating in a GARE cohort. So back in 2016, the Department of Public Health with the Housing Community Development participated with local counterparts in the first Bay Area cohorts. And then I'll kind of skip forward. We're now in our third year, and so working a lot on implementation and also supporting our partners at the other state agencies and departments. just to get into the work a little deeper, this is our vision statement for what we're calling our Racial and Health Equity Initiative. And the statement reads, the California Department of Public Health has a vision of California in which race is no longer a predictor of health, a predictor of one's health outcomes, and where all Californians can achieve their highest level of health and well-being. This has been a really, really important piece of our work. Is really centering it on this vision statement. And it's been important for us just to really clarify and be articulate about our values and where we're heading in this with our work. And then another piece, a critical piece of our work that we have been working on early on is just the connection of, or why we're focusing on racial equity, and specifically why around racism. So we lead with race and racism in this work because racism both directly and indirectly impacts health. And you'll see at the top of this slide, on the right and the left, racism affects the access to resources and living conditions, including housing, education, safe communities, jobs, clean water, et cetera, and that these resources and living conditions have direct and indirect impacts on health. Additionally, though, racism and other forms of discrimination also have direct impacts, directly impacts health through chronic stress. And I'm not going to go deep into kind of the mechanism, but just to summarize by saying that, you know, stress in itself is not a bad thing. Our stress responses have evolved over time to make sure that we can react quickly as we move through our daily lives. For example, you know, being able to identify a scary dog and run away in time. However, when individuals experience chronic stress from the cumulative daily experience of racism or discrimination, the normal stress response is disrupted, and we see unhealthy changes in the brain and body. And these are really materialized through what's known as epigenetics and allostatic load. Again, I'm not going to go into all that just right now, just in the interest of time, but this slide and this concept has been really important for our work in the Department of Public Health in terms of centering this work and why we are explicitly focusing not just on health equity, but racial equity. This next slide, I think one of the key pieces, or one of the key success factors that we've had now in our third year is really building an infrastructure to support the ongoing work. And this has enabled us to go beyond our 3-person team to really go deeper into the department and ensure that we can have more support and buy-in in doing this work. So I'm just going to walk through this really quickly at a high level. At the top of the screen, we have our steering committee. This is also our executive sponsor. Kelsey mentioned that each team has an executive sponsor. Ours is actually a team. And they're really responsible for the communication kind of up the chain, as well as being our advocates and champions at that highest level. The next box down is where our we're calling our racial and health equity work group. And this is the team. It's made up of 15 staff, and again, we really emphasize diversity of experience, lived experience and professional experience in this group. And so we have people who it's their first year on working with the Department of Public Health, as well as people who have 20+ years of experience, and really trying to emphasize just the broad diversity that we can have. And this team right now this is our workhorse. This is the team that's implementing our Racial and Health Equity Action Plan. And we're doing that primarily through 3 subgroup areas. So our team decided we have about, on the next slide I'll show you, we'll have 9 different goal areas, but in order to prioritize and make sure we have some early successes, we've identified 3 primary areas of work for early actions. And those areas are our hiring, recruitment, retention, education, training, and competencies, and communications. And eventually we'll build out each of these subgroups to have a much larger body. So right now they're relatively small, but in the coming year we're going to recruit additional folks, and really this will be the means at which we implement our Department of Public Health Racial and Health Equity Action Plan. And then at the bottom, just a little bit more information about our staff team. So this is our backbone team, so the team that supports all of this, including the fun things like, you know, room reservation and taking notes, all the way through to helping to draft work and participating in calls like this. So that's led by our Office of Health Equity, our Health and All Policy staff. As I mentioned, we have 9 different goal areas that we're focusing on. And one thing I'll just say is a lesson learned. There are both advantages and disadvantages to having so many goal areas. It's great that have the breadth of areas that we want to cover, and we also, as we've started to do implementation, have recognized that we really need to focus in so we can prioritize actual actions and implementation. So this, again, was where we focused in on the 3 highlighted goal areas. And then I'll just share one specific example around our education, training, and competencies. So we are in the process, so as Dwayne shared, that normalizing, organizing, operationalizing model, we're really focusing right now on normalizing the conversation. And we're doing that by actually building out a training team that can help provide trainings throughout our Department of Public Health. And so the images on the slide are actually from our Train the Trainer practice session. We had about 40 people participate in a pretty intensive 4-day training session. And we're now in the process of actually developing and continuing to practice the trainings with these folks. And these are all, everybody here is a volunteer. Some folks, their primary role is training, but many of the folks in the room, their day-to-day workload is not actually focused on training, but it was an area where they were interested in being able to provide back to the department. I'll just say it's been incredibly inspiring and exciting to work with this group, and I think we're going to be launching our initial trainings within the department later this calendar year, so probably November, December, and with the goal of training eventually all of our Department of Public Health staff on just an introductory training on racial and health equity. I know that we're almost out of time, so I'll wrap up there and turn it back over to Dwayne.
Yes, and I've thought in the interest of time, I would ask a couple of questions of the team, and then whoever would want to respond can do that I'm going to offer 3 questions that have come in through the Q&A. One is a question about the importance of holding equity in the name and framing. How has that made a difference? The second question is about a mechanical issue. How did departments come up with the money when it wasn't like they started the fiscal year with a line item for racial equity? And then the third question is, with the forthcoming change of administration and also transition of department heads, how do you see this taking shape? Will it slow down in the transition time? What's the plan for that? So maybe we can get to those 3 questions at the least, and I'll turn it back to you guys to chew on that.
Well, this is Meredith. I can go ahead and answer the first 2 questions from the perspective of the Department of Public Health. We, in the naming of our initiative, we actually found that it was essential to include all 3 terms, racial, health, and equity, in part because the department had such a long history of health equity, and that is really still at the forefront of this work. We wanted to maintain the health equity, and we decided to explicitly call it racial equity, just recognizing that if we don't lead with race, it often becomes the elephant in the room, and that it makes people uncomfortable to talk about. And so we actually intentionally decided to lead with racial equity. And then to answer the second question around money, that's a great question, and it was different for all the different departments. From the Department of Public Health, we were actually very lucky to be able to use some of our staff savings, and then from a vacant position, but also I know that a number of other departments, because we had such great high-level leadership buy-in, they were able to kind of tap various funds that either were underspent for the year or otherwise, allocated for special projects. Julia, did you want to answer question number 3?
Yeah, hi, this is Julia. The third question about the upcoming gubernatorial change is something that we're thinking about a lot, and we will be doing a lot of leadership briefings early in 2019 with all of the new folks who are coming in and who will be appointed In addition, we're meeting now with department directors and agency secretaries to talk about their equity and racial equity and health and all policies work and make sure that we're partnering with them on their transition planning processes to get this information into transition materials and make sure that it reaches the new administration. We're also doing, kind of as part of our work to normalize, really trying to set this up so that there are commitments being made now for participation in 2019. And because those commitments can be made now by departments and agencies, then when the new administration comes in, this becomes part of business as usual and the work that's already underway. And we had some success with that with the last gubernatorial transition, so we're looking forward to that as well.
Great. I'm going to try to squeeze in. Oh, go Kelsey. Go ahead.
I would just quickly add that as folks are developing their plans, they're also thinking about the timeline. For example, CDPH has a 5-year plan. Some people are also creating 5-year or 3-year plans. So they're definitely thinking long term, and I think having that action plan approved will set a precedent that this is an important topic.
Great, thank you, Kelsey. So I'm going to try to squeeze 2 more in before we wrap to close. One is, our staff volunteered for these trainings or assigned to take it on, and is there a resentment if people are assigned? And the other is, can you name some early wins? We've talked a lot about processes and strategies, but for people who are in departments that are outcome focused, even though we recognize this work takes time, what have you been able to point to that shows this is something to continue?
Yeah, this is Meredith. I will answer the question about the trainings and start to answer the outcomes question. So our Train the Trainers series, everyone who participated is a volunteer. And in terms of rolling out the actual trainings, we're starting first with a strategy of doing voluntary basis. This is something we've heard from a number of our peers from other local jurisdictions, both within California and outside of California, that starting with voluntary it was recommended. We do hope to eventually be able to go to mandatory, but I think in terms of just getting early buy-in and kind of moving towards that tipping point theory, so having about 30% of our CDPH population, which is about 4,000 people, on board. Just so that we can have that momentum that we need when we start to reach people who maybe are not champions or early adopters for this work. So that's the approach we are going to take. And that's we're looking at about 3 years of training to build up to having everybody trained. And then outcomes. It's a really, really good question. One thing that I didn't talk about is our action plan really is at a very high level, so it's department-wide, and we're not in this action plan going down to we are organized by centers. One thing that we are doing is starting to work with our center partners to actually develop their own action plans that they will actually start to be able to get into kind of more programmatic pieces and measuring various outcomes. So we kind of acknowledge and recognize that our action plan is largely focused, the current existing action plan is largely focused on kind of systems and processes, and that to measure those health outcomes in the field is something that's going to take a lot longer and is actually going to have to occur kind of at the more programmatic level where they can be, tracking the data both in terms of the implementation, but also like the on-the-ground outcomes. I will say just quickly, we did do an all-staff equity survey. So in terms of measuring just kind of current knowledge with the idea that we can move forward in terms of tracking knowledge as an outcome in terms of awareness and familiarity with racial and health equity.
And Laura, as I hand the talking stick back to you, I want to quickly answer one other question that came in around addressing other forms of inequity, gender or otherwise, in the training. And I'll just say that our frame is race forward, and the frame that I think the teams have carried into this work is that all forms of marginalization are important, but as intersectional beings. But we lead with race, because if we don't solve for racial equity, we won't get to equity. by gender, heterosexism, sexism, ableism. Within all those forms of marginalization, if you disaggregate by race, we see disparate impact for people of color. And so that frame helps us both build alliances across forms of marginalization we're trying to address, but also list up the centrality of addressing race to get into solutions. And with that, I will turn it back to Laura for our close.
Thank you so much, Dwayne and Julia, Kelsey, and Meredith for your presentations today. And also a big thanks to the California Endowment for sponsoring today's event. And thank you most of all to you, our audience. Thank you for bearing with us, and a recording of today's presentation along with slides and a transcript will be available for you by next week at dialogueforhealth.org. You will receive an email from us with a link to a brief survey. We hope you'll take that. And this includes instructions for requesting a certificate of completion for this event. So thank you again so much for being with us and continuing in this event. And that concludes today's web forum. Thank you. Have a great day.